Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all good and well. So time for a new album ranking on the channel. This time I'm tackling a giant band, I would say, none other than Gojira, one of the biggest names in metal. And, you know, for much of their career, they were somewhat in obscurity, I would say. You know, their first few albums, it probably took until around the time, I would say, between when L'Enfant Sauvage came out and when Magma was released in 2016. And about that sort of period was when Gojira really started to get into the minds of many people, certainly many metalheads. And I think they're also known as well for raising awareness of things like environmental issues and bringing that across in their music as well, and really kind of trying to push forwards that agenda, as well as creating some of the most unique sounding and distinctive music that has been in metal for me for a number of years. I'd say they're somewhat comparable to Meshuggah in the way they have been they're sort of trailblazers on the scene, right? They've created their own sound that many bands have been so influenced by. You hear certain things that make you think of Gojira. You know, many people, when they hear say a scrape on a guitar bottom string or something and it creates that Gojira-like sound, they always like saying, oh, it's that Gojira sound, or that sounds like Gojira. And that's the band they always compare a band doing that technique to. So it's a really interesting thing how this band have really impacted, I think, had a major impact on the metal scene since they started with their debut album, Terra Incognita, which was released in 2001, so quite a while ago. And that's, so I'm going to be ranking these albums from my least favourite to my favourite, as I always do. There are just 7 here. One thing that surprises me, they only have 7 albums. I thought maybe, by now they might have had more, but there have been gaps between albums of 4 or 5 years sometimes. So that's probably why. But, I hope this band still have plenty more to offer in years to come. So let's start with my least favourite album from Gojira. It's actually going to be their debut album, Terra Incognita. For me, this album is just a bit too sprawling for my taste, and you feel the time. You can tell Gojira here are already, establishing their sound. They have got, those Gojira things you can hear straight away. Those Gojira elements are pretty eminent. From the word go on this album, you hear those riffs and you think that sounds like a Gojira riff. The problem for me on this album is largely that it is just a bit long. You just feel the time. As I say, there's still some good moments on here. My favourite track is Satan is a Lawyer, Fire is Everything, and In the Forest. But this album is just a little too unrefined and not concise enough. Doesn't get the message through like other albums do that were to come later. So that's my least favourite album, Terra Incognita. Next up we have what may be quite low down on the list for a lot of Gojira fans. I do remember how much many really praised this album. This is the most recent album, Fortitude, that came out in 2021. I think I gave this a pretty good score, like a 7.5 or an 8, something like that when it came out. Still a very good album, still very accomplished. This is Gojira in their later period, I think, moving towards a slightly more accessible sound with songs with very, like choruses and things that you'll remember quite quickly. You've got tracks like The Chant on here and Amazonia getting across very powerful messages, about, again, the sort of impact of humans on the environment. And I think it's a good album and again, does carry a very powerful message, but sound-wise is where I take a bit of an issue with this album. That's why it's low down. It just doesn't pack the punch of a lot of other Gojira albums. For me, there's something in the production of this one where I don't feel the riffs hitting me the same. I really like that about Gojira albums, or the other albums that are higher, is that they just have that raw aggression a bit more, but they're also, unlike Terra Incognita, they also have a cohesion about them as well. So that's why Fortitude, for me, is a bit lower down. It doesn't pack the punch. That's the only way I can put it, I think, of some of the other Gojira albums. Next up at number 5 is The Link. Maybe, I see this one. I have seen a few Gojira rankings, and this one's pretty low down. It's usually towards the bottom, if not the bottom. the link is maybe there for, I don't think it's by any stretch their best album, but I do think it actually is pretty good when you really listen to this one, and revisiting this one. This has also gone up a little bit in my estimation in Gojira's discography. Some really solid songs, and I think the guitar riffs on this album are particularly good actually, with tracks like Indians, one of my favourite. I really like Remembrance and Wisdom Comes as well. But yeah, for a sophomore album, pretty good. And, you know, it's just, for me, it was going back to this and discovering some really powerful tracks, like those tracks I named, Remembrance, Indians, and Wisdom Comes, that just really made me a bit more on board with this one. It just has a ferociousness, a raw aggression, but I think it's a little bit more compact and well put together than the predecessor that was Terra Incognita. I just think this is a little better. Coming up next at number 4 is Magma from 2016. Now, I love this album. So, you know, it's one of these albums you put down and it's only in the middle and you think, how can this album only be at number 4, right? It's a great album, this. And it brought the band into more of a commercial, you know, got more commercial traction than their albums before, I think, had got. It's a beautifully atmospheric kind of an album with much more of an atmosphere than prior albums, I would say. They do away with, you know, focusing just on more on the riffage side of things, and their proggier elements perhaps to come along with, you know, 9 or 10 tracks here that are very focused, but all of them sort of very memorable as well. I really enjoy the title track on here, Magma, and knowing this album was dedicated towards the Duplantier brothers' mum as well also carries a certain amount of emotive persuasion and makes this a very good album. Silvera and Stranded are my other favourite tracks, which incidentally were singles on this one as well, but I also love the title track, Magma, which I think is just stunning. Oh, and who can forget that solo in Silvera? Oh my God. I remember actually having the privilege of hearing this in one of the rock clubs I enjoyed going to in London, and hearing Silvera, you know, just blasting out the speakers at me. It was just a great, you know, great experience to have. Next up at number 3, perhaps it's lower down. I thought this might even be my number 1 before revisiting. This is the thing with me ranking these bands' discographies. When they have very strong discographies, it's really difficult to decide on an order of a band you also love. You just kind of find yourself, you can switch the orders around so quickly. And actually, I might have considered this album on another day as my number 1. It's L'Enfant Sauvage. And at number 3 here, inspired by Francois Truffaut's film of the same name, kind of about the story of this child who's found in a forest, and you know, he's got behaviours that are more like a wild animal than a civilised human being as such. And that's kind of what this album is kind of part inspired by, what inspired the album. And you know, it certainly feels like that. There's a wild kind of feel to this album. It's pretty aggressive most of the way through, but with some moments of the odd break and the odd more instrumental part as well coming into things to create a little bit more of an atmosphere, but it is mostly, to me, quite a sort of, you know, pretty, you know, it does have its emotive moments. One of the bits that gets me on this album, L'Enfant Sauvage, is during that track, the title track, L'Enfant Sauvage, when Joe Duplantier is singing a line just before that major pummeling riff kicks in, where he's going, I ran away from institutions, I owe myself life. And as soon as he lets go of that, of life, it's so powerful. I mean, when I saw them live playing this song, this is one of my favourite live experiences, actually. Gojira, you must see them live to really, I think, fully embrace their music. They really get the crowd going. They perform everything nigh on perfect. There are no mistakes in a Gojira gig, right? I failed to hear them actually when I've been to see them, and they are absolutely on point. But they also really get the crowd absolutely behind them. In the gigs I've been to, and the gigs I've seen them live on as well. Incredible band live. Gone off on a tangent here, but it's just because I want to get that across, because L'Enfant Sauvage played live is like nothing I have witnessed in my whole life. It was incredible. And you know, it's the abrasiveness of this track. It's aggression. It's so raw. It's so uninhibited. And like I say, when Joe Duplantier sings that life, that bit of the song that I owe myself life, it's electrifying. It gives me goosebumps every time. It's an absolutely sort of stunning bit, both for me of lyricism, but also of just extreme metal. Moving on to, so my favourite songs on this album as well, I've got to say L'Enfant Sauvage, Gift of Guilt, Born in Winter for me. I mean, those are probably three of the more well-known tracks from the album, but they are just bruising, they're battering, they're fantastic. Next up at number 2 is The Way of All Flesh for me. Another great album. This for me is the album that has just the sort of, in terms of numbers, the best songs back to back on this album. It has so many great individual moments, individual tracks, that this had to be high in my ranking here. It comes in at number 2. Favourite tracks on The Way of All Flesh, I would say we're talking Toxic, oh dear, where is it? So Toxic Garbage Island, Vacuity, and a deeper cut on this album called Yamar's Messengers, which is absolutely brilliant, I think, and an underrated Gojira track on this album. Again, a great album, getting across the points Gojira wants to get across, doing so, I think, in a pretty cohesive and focused way, more so than, as I say, a couple of their earlier albums. But that leads me on to the album that's my number 1 Gojira album of all time, which can only be, for me, it's iconic, it's brilliant, it's perhaps the most progressive, it's a concept album. Alright, it's called From Mars to Sirius. It was their 3rd album that came out in 2005. And for me, got them on the map, at least in terms of, coming out to a lot of critical acclaim. A lot of critics really love this album as well. I mean, I love it. I think it's absolutely iconic. And, yes, the album's quite long, but it's one of these albums that is long, but it has the breaks at the appropriate moments. It's got the sort of the amount of Gojira heaviness and aggression that balances out well with that, though, and it's just brilliant. This is a concept album addressing the rebirth of a dead planet through this kind of space travel type storyline, and that's kind of from Mars to Sirius. Because Mars is the kind of planet of war, right, and Sirius is the planet of peace, and it's kind of all about this kind of theme of rebirth, of going from something warlike to something more peaceful. And yeah, it's full of bangers. Where Dragons Dwell, Heaviest Matter of the Universe, and Flying Whales as examples. I think the middle part of this album is you need to listen to it uninterrupted and just appreciate just the sheer magnitude of this part of the album. But the whole album, it's one of those albums you just immerse yourself in. You'll be rewarded with one of the best metal experiences, one of the best progressive metal experiences you're likely to have. Thank you everyone as always for watching this ranking. Do let me know your Gojira album rankings in the comments. I look forward to reading those and to hearing from you. Otherwise, from me, until next time, it's bye for now.